Lovely. So it'd be great just to kick off, and please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Ollie, the CEO of Almond.org, and we're developing a free app for consumers that helps them become carbon balanced. And there's three core kind of pillars that we're focusing on: buying better, acting better, and then offsetting the rest.
Hi, I'm Max Ingalls. I'm chair of the emissions working group for the Blockchain and Climate Institute. I also help advise private equity funds who are involved in renewable energy. I think, in particular, in relation to addressing climate solutions, it's about looking at our consumption of energy and how we manage that better.
Hi, I'm Gerard Kelly. I'm CEO and co-founder of iRenewable, and we provide management software for off-grid companies in Africa specifically, with the idea of trying to help off-grid companies provide energy access to those who need it. Our longer-term goal is more about leveraging the blockchain-based credit histories our software generates and helping those bottom-of-the-pyramid end users actually build robust credit histories and then improve financial and social inclusion in the developing countries. In terms of climate change in the developing world, which is my specific focus area, I think it should be more around how you can combine grid and off-grid energies to impact climate change, because I think the solution in the developing world will be very different to the developing world, Europe and the US. I think that's a conversation that sometimes the disconnect between the two is quite important.
Fantastic. So on a daily basis, we're struck with the realities of the climate crisis. And I think for many people, there's a deep lack of hope. Let's just be honest. Like, obviously, you need to be hopeful in terms of your initiatives and what you're pushing forward. But genuinely speaking, how filled with hope are you right now?
I think it's very challenging, and I'm hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist. But one of the things that we've really found from all of the people we spoke to is, this hopelessness, this helplessness. So very much what our aim is to try and give consumers the tools to kind of take back control, to understand their footprint, and show them not the easy wins, but the kind of low-hanging fruit and the things that they can do to lower their emissions.
Just out of interest, for those who are in the room, hopelessness and helplessness, can you just raise your hands, please, if you feel hopeless and helpless when it comes to tackling the climate crisis? Okay, very few of you. Many of you feel empowered, which is great to hear. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of the ways that you feel empowered. How about yourself, sir?
I think it's a case of trying to identify what the underlying problem is. As consumers and as people, we're consuming more and more energy and understanding how that is better used. I think if you're looking at it where emissions are coming from, a lot of it is farming, and now there are more technologies around to solve those problems, whether it's Beyond Meat or technological advances to reduce emissions in that way.
Can you just unpack that a bit further? So in what ways are those technologies looking to solve that problem?
Through essentially removing cattle farming, which is one of the largest creators of emissions globally.
And how's it improving that, or how's it removing that?
It removes it through a process of essentially creating processed meat in a laboratory, which is much less, creates less emissions than through creating cattle and farming in general.
Great, thank you.
I think it's depending on which way you look at it. So in some ways, temperatures are rising, climate change is happening, so it can be a hopeless point of view. But if you look at the history and how quickly people are reacting to it, I think we can have hope. So I think in the 90s, research would have said, okay, there won't be a huge, or even go back to 60s, 70s, there won't be a huge impact in the next 100 years. We now realize climate change can happen in between 5 and 50 years. It doesn't take centuries. So having that awareness, and I think research saying like 11,000 scientists back, I think every climate change scientist, or every scientist in general, I'd say, would pretty much back the climate change is a thing. On the other side, you have some governments, such as the US, who are maybe not backing it the way we would like. But so to answer the first question in terms of hope, so yes, there is hope. People are aware, people are having more of a voice, governments are backing it in Europe in particular. So yes, there's hope that we can do something. I think the more limiting part is what we can do in the short term. So I believe temperatures will rise, but it's what we can do in the next 50 years, 10 to 50 years, to limit that is the big thing.
Lovely. So it'd be great to talk investment. So do you want to
I
come
was
in?
just going to say, governments are technically backing it, and they've all committed to the Paris Agreement, but ultimately that hasn't resulted in any substantive change. They have stated that they are backing it, but in all honesty, that hasn't resulted in any deliverables, and I think it will take consumer and corporates to take on that mantle, simply because I don't necessarily think that governments have enough political capital to use on climate change.
And in terms of taking on that mantle then, so that partnership between consumers and corporates, what are some of the ways that we should be taking on that mantle?
I think companies that are looking more into renewable energy, I think the UNFCCC should look at ways to expand coverage for emissions so that it isn't within the very narrow range that it currently operates, to allow certain organizations to achieve emissions reductions and thereby sell credits. And I think it will take probably a global platform to sell emissions rather than each country using a more isolated register.
Okay, great. So when it comes to investment, we recognise that the US VC firms have often been quite slow in really investing heavily into clean tech. But we also recognise that there's, as per the first presentation, 39% of people who are looking for profit and purpose in terms of where they're looking to see their returns come from. So it's interesting that here in the UK, it is the likes of the Crowdcubes and the Seeders and these crowdfunding platforms, those who are getting behind it. But what would be some of the challenges that you find from an investment point of view in terms of really trying to drive forward the need to invest into technologies that are beginning to address or trying to tackle climate crisis?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest Climate Kick is very good at supporting very new stage technologies. I think, so for example, there's a very good Oxford startup called Origin Power that is involved in carbon sequestration, and whether that solves a lot of the problems that currently exist about removing carbon from the atmosphere. I think very difficult to get an early stage venture in that field because it takes time for the technology to be proven. And the likelihood is that it's, particularly if you look around fusion power and other things, it's liable to fail. And so you have to take a VC or someone who is actually just willing to be a philanthropist in support of climate change.
How about yourself? How have you found the ease or access for support?
I think it's been more challenging than I originally anticipated, but I think that people are waking up to the huge opportunities, commercial opportunities from this sort of shift to this new green economy, and I'm hoping in the coming years it will become easier and people will actually understand that there is actually money to be made from this transition. But yeah, certainly for us, it was more challenging than I anticipated. It's taken longer for us to raise money than we originally planned.
And out of interest here, is there, could you just raise your hands, please, if you're involved in a clean tech startup or a startup that you are supporting on a financial level? Just please raise your hands. There's a lady there at the back. Fantastic. And just to invite you, it'd be great just to be able to hear from you if you care to share the work that you are doing. So do come and join us if you'd like to. Yes. And from yourself, I know that we're talking about sort of financial and social inclusivity. So help us unpack that. So we've got the challenges here in the UK, but what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing?
In the developing world, in Africans specifically where we operate, I think the difficulty is that people at the bottom of the pyramid that have no access to electricity, in terms of financial and social inclusion, and the 350 million unbanked, we'll say, in Africa, 600 million without electricity. So there's a number of challenges to be trying to addressed at the same time. And to give, an anecdote of where the problem lies from an energy perspective, in Tanzania, for instance, they would claim their ambition is to have 100% grid connectivity by 2030. So that's a great goal, but it's not really possible in the current climate, in that we visited villages out there for different pilot studies, and essentially there are areas where the grid actually runs right through a village of maybe a couple of thousand people, and the government would consider that grid connected, but the actual power lines are not connected to anybody because there's no transformers, there's no step down, because it's too expensive to connect them. So the difficulty there is you've if a government drive to get full connectivity, because that's what maybe the president said he would do, and it's a noble ambition, but I think that has to link in with decentralized energy as well. So you need a combination of grid and off-grid energy, and then how that filters down into financial inclusion. And you need a subsidies-based model, which I think is lacking somewhat in the developing world. So you've got a combination of government-based funding driving grid connectivity and maybe more external funding driving off-grid and decentralized energy. And the two are not really meeting in the middle very well at the moment. So that's the big problem in terms of how you can include those at the bottom of the pyramid and to try and climb the energy ladder. How do you find a solution to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's better, or sort of areas which are very remote need to move away from the proposition around the grid, because it just doesn't, the infrastructure will not, the cost benefit analysis in Africa will not work, simply because they're better getting remote local power solutions to power local infrastructure.
Thank you. It'd be lovely to hear about your business in terms of and how easy you found it to access support or finance.
Yeah, sure. My name is Giovanna. I am working with the CEO of Woken Up. And as you can imagine, that means someone woke up to the realization of the fact that we are at a time where we really need to collaborate and help each other to achieve certain goals. We've got the climate impact pressures, we've got other pressures, financial. We know that there is a need to create impact, and there's got to be purpose-driven investment and such. But what the tech intends to do is to create a platform for people to become aware of what is it that we're trying to achieve together. If you think about it, we're all here from different points of view, from different businesses, from different approaches. We're trying to do the same thing, but we're walking separately. So what we're trying to do with the tech is to create that platform, not just to have a conversation about it, but to truly collaborate, to get to understand each other's efforts and projects and where the money is being spent as such. Our CEO is going to be here this afternoon to talk potentially a little bit more about what does it mean to get funding for that kind of tech, because we're offering an opportunity to be able to help each other, but we're not giving you the solution. We're still looking at how do we create that solution for each other. So I guess the challenges we face is to have enough opportunity to talk about it. So thank you. To share with everybody what is happening. Is launching this week. And then we start to look at what else do we do in line with the investment. Our CEO was just at the Web Summit talking about it again. What can we do to help each other? Do we need to help each other with money? Do we need to help each other with knowledge? Do we need to understand a little bit more about what's happening in the economy in Brazil? What do we do in the UK to support other regions and such? So that's about Woken Up.
Thank you very much. And it's interesting because obviously we mentioned earlier on about philanthropists stepping in, and we recognise that the likes of Bill Gates has made a dent, as it were, in some of the initiatives that he's been funding. But then also I was really interested to hear about the idea of the government infrastructure banks, because I think that really resonates. Some of the flagship projects that we've seen a level of adoption for. So when it comes to say electric vehicles, we've seen a level of noise about that. We've seen a level of embracing that, but yet at the same time, we don't see the integration between the ways that we're building roads to lay down the tarmac, literally, to pave the way for what it is that we need to do going forward. Your thoughts on the idea of a government infrastructure bank, and how comfortable would you feel handing over equity to a government as opposed to VCs? Which would be your preferred route?
I'm indifferent, I think, really, to be honest with you, and I think it's a great idea. And we're currently talking to division in the Portuguese government. They have a sort of social innovation fund where they've got lots of different financial instruments to support impact projects, which something like that in the UK would be great. I think one of their initiatives is 70% match funding, so so really attractive. And I'd have actually no issues, giving equity to to the government if it essentially enables us to to do what we need to do.
Yeah. I'd actually, if you don't mind, follow up from that is, how would you think is the best way for you to be well informed in terms of, okay, you give money to the government, and what's the best way for them to choose how to help the different projects or the different roads? What is the best way for you to know where to put the money, really.
I think I think actually when you get to a certain critical mass of investor interest, then you've almost kind of pre-qualified, the market has pre-qualified your project in a way. So I think that would make sense, for you to unlock funding when you've hit a certain milestone. But I would imagine a scenario where you could have different types of funds targeting different SDGs or different, key kind of core issues potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting seeing that there is the beginnings of murmurs. So I was encouraged to see Amazon buying 100,000 electric vehicles from Rivian, and that was like a step in that direction. I was excited, although there's been some criticism levelled at Google, and rightfully so, but I was still excited to see that they'd last week announced that they started a climate crisis accelerator. And I think there's some steps that are being made, but at the same time, until... I always remember Nest's CEO, when he sold out, and he sold out for 3.2 billion, whatever it was, but he turned around and he sort of said, basically, we are in a situation where almost clean tech is a dirty word, because the ways that in the past people invested into solar, and solar didn't take off to the levels that it needed to take off. So maybe that infrastructure, that connection between a government-related bank is the way forward. I know Portugal is working extensively well there. I'm involved in a company that's moved the headquarters over to Portugal because of the fact that actually the government's involvement and engagement has been completely different to that here in the UK. So I just want to move on. Extinction Rebellion. So in the last year, a year ago, we wouldn't have been aware of Extinction Rebellion. We wouldn't have been aware of Greta Thunberg. And these two groups of people, one person, one group of people, has really helped catalyse this agenda. Out of interest, was just please again raise your hands either on the panel here or in the audience. Those that attended any of the protests over the last month or so, please just raise your hands. Okay, it's about a tenth of the room. So it'd be interesting. So you raise your hands. I was there myself. So do you feel that this level of protesting and I suppose really trying to stand ground and civil disobedience, albeit peacefully, do you think this is a good route forward? And why would you, as a tech entrepreneur, be spending time, arguably, pointlessly, protesting on the streets of London?
I actually had the opportunity to attend two protests, one in Bolivia, where the fires were still raging, and one in London, and both were completely different. And about 5 years ago, if you asked me if I would have attended something like that, I would have said, no, I don't see the point. But if we don't raise awareness by making noise, how else will people realize there is more than one person talking about it? And masses, produces change at the end of the day. What I do believe very firmly is that the reason why I'm so involved and very, very passionate about Woken Up as well is that if we don't create opportunities to produce some result from those protests, we're just making noise. So as much as I think they're very valuable and I think we should encourage them, there should be something else. There should be a next step from that. So for me personally has been becoming involved in other impact and purpose-driven projects like Woken Up or the charity that I represent as well, creating impact, making sure that we're doing something else. So I think we need to do both in parallel. Join the masses, but also do something else about it. Not join the masses and then go back to normal, because otherwise we just carry on.
Yeah. And for me, it's about time really, and we've got very little time, and so we have to be quite drastic about how we approach this. And the Extinction Rebellion's approach with direct action is scientifically proven to work, and it has worked. And a climate emergency has been declared. People's Assembly is now in process and will happen, and hopefully negate some of the political challenges of people with the 4-year cycle and term. And then on a personal level, I've moved away from. I used to be in the food and drink industry, and I've created this project. For when I had kids and fearing for their future, and so very much for me, it's I wanted to be there on a personal level to support what they're doing and to try and do my bit, and lead by example, I guess. But it has obviously disrupted a lot of people, but it has also been incredibly successful, I'd say.
My daughter would not let me not go to the protests. She was often shouting at me off the back of the forest fires, when the world's lungs dies, we die too. and she'd pin me down on the sofa and be screaming in my head and demanded that I took her down there. You were about to jump in.
Just a point maybe to the points made around doing something tangible from it. And earlier, good point you made that governments make different promises, but they haven't really been able to make a dent in climate change crisis so far. So maybe the two combined are the next steps to define, okay, clear goals that they need to meet, and then using the subject here, the digital impact and maybe the blockchain-based backing of certain KPIs. Very easy to say it, but do that in a energy efficient way that it's quite publicly available and it's a bit more of a global effort. I know there's a couple of companies looking at this type of solution, but actually this Extinction Rebellion crisis may just give it a kick in the right direction if you want, because they're not getting there at the moment, so maybe that's what's needed.
I mean, so I work on the Blockchain and Climate Institute, and the British government is looking at this, and they are looking at a collaborative approach, because I think that is essential to whatever we implement, whether it's global infrastructure or whether it's on a case-by-case basis, working with different countries to try and solve and try and address emissions through essentially a clear audit process that what each country is emitting and how they're improving that. They are trying to solve this problem, but it is such a global problem that no government is likely to tax. The issue is no government is likely to tax its population with a carbon tax. So what are the options? And the UK government is looking at what they can do, and I know it's something that Jane has looked at as well on her side. What needs to be done is everyone needs to collaborate together, but for the Extinction Rebellion, it's a case of people need to start using that and buying more carbon neutral products.
Are there any questions from the floor that either take on that conversation on? We've got a few more minutes just for questions.
So today we talk a lot about, there is a lot of research saying that we should divide our standards of living by 6 if you want to use the resources of our planet in a sustainable way. My first question is, do you think that new technology and clean technology would help to do that? And if yes, don't you think that people would just increase their standards of living and just creating like a vicious circle?
Yeah, they would just, I mean, you look at it, whether we're going through, whether battery technologies in cars and through our mobile uses, we're just increasing our use of technology. We have to address the habits that we are in and resolve that side of it. But I think trying to reduce how a lot of the emissions are produced through either energy or through farming is an essential way to do that, and for consumers to make a choice, an elective decision to use products which don't actually offset their impact on the globe.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Laurie Goering from the Thomson Reuters Foundation. I'm curious about two things. You talked about how a carbon tax is a tough thing for governments to put on, but it seems that having a price on carbon is crucial to addressing this problem in a fundamental way. Do you see this technology that any of you use, or any of the digital technology, being useful in driving that? And secondly, we're talking about Extinction Rebellion. We saw the Metropolitan Police here try to shut down those protests, and Extinction Rebellion eventually won in a judicial review this last week. But there's lots of questions that human rights organizations are raising now about surveillance of protests and the use of AI and digital technologies to track protesters. I'm curious how you feel about that, and if there are any sort of efforts now to make sure that we don't see something down the road as these protests carry on and get bigger to try to stop them using the technology.
On a carbon tax, from a government standpoint, if one country implemented a carbon tax, they wouldn't necessarily, a company could relocate to another country where the tax is more beneficial. I think that's why I don't think a carbon tax will work. I think a price of carbon is very effective. But the question is how that is used and how that is incorporated into companies, and whether it's driven that from consumers we make more companies carbon balanced. In relation to your second point, I would say probably the government doesn't have enough resources to be that concerned about managing and using AI to track protesters. I don't think that is their priority in my general opinion.
Just super quick, the second question. If we can demonstrate that we've created impact through those protests, just go back to if we spend time also finding out what else can we do to help the government, we're probably going to keep them quiet.
Just one quick addition. I think that I don't see a future without a carbon tax, but I think it has to be a carbon tax and dividend to support those on low incomes with the transition. And I anticipate within the next 5 years we'll see something being implemented. So I think it's going to happen.
Fantastic. So as we draw to an end, so often we talk about artificial intelligence being best deployed when there's the machines and people able to overlap. So maybe when it comes to technology and when it comes to trying to tackle the climate crisis, what we've got that came from this today is that maybe it's about the technology, but alongside that, the protests that sit alongside each other to enable this to land and to work. And just a final note on that, I remember speaking to the police when we were doing the protests, and one of the things this one chap said to me, as a policeman, I had a long conversation with him. He said, look, we don't want to be arresting people here at all. All of my colleagues are in agreement with me right now. This is a tokenistic thing. We've got to do what we've got to do. And they're peacefully carrying people off, and then they got around the corner and they peacefully let them go again. And so every now and again we have to process the paperwork, but these are token arrests. We're in agreement with this issue. And hopefully, I'm sure to say, all of us in agreement with the fact that we need to take and tackle climate crisis very urgently, and hopefully technology can be an aid in that. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.